announce our last speaker of today. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Anastasia Krasheninnikova, right? Thank you. A senior researcher at the Max Planck Institute at the Comparative Cognition Research Group based in Tenerife. Anastasia earned her PhD in behavioral biology at the University of Hamburg. Following this, she was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology in Seewiesen, and later on she received also support from the Animal Minds project. Her work spans numerous collaborations and ongoing projects, including investigation into mental time travel and studies on animal welfare in parrots. Currently, in collaboration with her mentor, Dr. Auguste von Bayer, who is unfortunately not here today, she focuses on the evolution of intelligence, cognition, and vocal learning, mainly in parrots. So, please take the stage, and we are really excited to hear your talk today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to start with, I would like to introduce to you our lab a little bit. So our group is conducting research on comparative cognition in Tenerife, in the research station that is a collaboration between the Max Planck Institute for Biological Intelligence and the Loro Parque and Loro Parque Fondación. So broadly, we are interested in the evolution of complex cognition and involving different aspects of cognition. So social cognition, for example, cooperation skills, problem helping behavior, social learning, including imitation, then physical cognition, flexible problem solving and tool use, and also some fundamental aspects of cognition like inhibitory control and delayed gratification. Most of our subjects, parrots, are touchscreen trained and also trained with for different paradigms like token exchange and different test batteries. So here you can see like the station is also a part of the public outreach in the zoo, in the Loro Parque Zoo. And it's equipped, the testing rooms are in a pavilion that is accessible for the public and are equipped with one-way mirror windows. So the public can look inside, but we and the birds are not disturbed by the people passing by. And it's also important for the Loro Parque as a modern zoo to participate in public education and to teach people why conservation and fundamental research is important. So in the lab, we have 5 different species with around 50 individuals in total. We are focusing at the moment on macaws with three macaw species belonging to Ara genus, all critically endangered, living in different habitats. So for example, the blue-throated macaws living in a more dry habitat, open area like savannas. Great green macaws are found in rainforest, and red-fronted macaws are mostly in like semi-desert and mountainous areas. And then we have another smaller macaw species, the blue-headed macaws, and as an outgroup, so to say, African grey parrots. But maybe even more important than the research station itself, it's the access that the collaboration with the Loro Parque Fondación provides for us, is the access to the biggest collection of the parrot in the world, that in the breeding station that the Loro Parque Fondación has with more than 4,000 parrots belonging to over 200 different species. So this vast number of different species in one place allows us systematic comparisons within one taxonomic group. And of course, it's great opportunities for any comparative research. But why parrots? So obviously, parrots are a group with a high number of different species, differing in brain size, in body size, inhabiting different habitats, showing different types of mating systems, but also they belong to the most intelligent animal groups. So parrots excel, or our other vertebrate groups in the cognitive performance, in the number of, in the relative brain size, and the number of neuron density. As Björn mentioned today, the neuron density is not really linear. So a bigger brain does not necessarily mean that the number of neurons are higher. But what we know is that together with primates, our closest relatives, dolphins, another mammalian species, and crows, another big, large-brained bird group, parrots have the most advanced complex cognition. And because they're so distantly related, it's quite likely that the complex cognition evolved independently. It's a convergent evolution process. So it's quite helpful if we compare these groups with each other. It helps us to investigate the evolution of intelligence in general. And also to test hypotheses about its evolution. So for example, if we compare different species with different habitats, for example, species that inhabit habitats with environmental unpredictability, with those in similar paradigms, with those who live in a more predictable environment, and found that differences, we can draw some conclusion about what selective pressure favor the evolution of complex cognition. For example, are they more flexibly, more behavioral flexibly? Can they adapt faster, possess tool use, or are species with complex or more complex social life are also better at cooperation skills? Are they more prone to show helping behavior, and so on? And one of the most impressive or interesting facts about parrots is their ability to imitate sounds, including human speech. Here you can listen to Einstein.
Would you like to introduce yourself? Are you famous? How about some animal sounds? Can you do a red wolf? How about an owl? The pretty songbirds? How about a rooster? Can you do a horse? Good.
So so African gray parrots are the most famous for the almost unlimited skills to mimic different sounds, anthropogenic sounds, words, whistles, water sounds, whatever, they can imitate. And we know that parrots, as such, are good imitators, but we don't really know much about are all parrots good at it, or is there some variation in the vocal imitation skills. So vocal production learning, imitation, is the ability to learn new vocalizations by imitating them from others. And it's a prerequisite for human language, since without acquiring a large and open-ended vocabulary, the flexible and expressive power of language would be quite limited. And it's a quite rare trait in animals. Apart from us humans, only a few mammalian taxa have it. For example, some marine mammals like dolphins and sea lions, elephants and bats. And only 3 avian taxa, the hummingbirds, songbirds, and parrots. So given the lack of evidence for vocal production learning in our closest relatives in primates, research has focused on songbirds as a dominant animal model for studying developmental processes, acquisition mechanisms, neurological underpinnings, and evolutionary history of vocal imitation. Despite the evolutionary distance between the songbirds and humans, songbirds and humans have evolved some analogous specialized brain circuits, including cortico-basal ganglia loops that are similar in their function. Then, despite the fact that songbirds have some sensitive developmental periods in which they learn the new vocalizations, but then outside this sensitive period, they stop, or most of the songbirds stop learning something new. Still, recent research found that they, similar to humans, they possess babbling phases where they practice, like toddlers in humans, they practice, like also Björn was giving the example, during this acquisition process. So do the songbirds too. But many colleagues argued that songbirds are a good model, but parrots actually might be even better models to study possible origins and selection pressures related to vocal production learning and, to some extent, language. So in contrast to many, not all, but many songbirds, where only males learn new vocalizations, in parrots, both sexes are open-ended learners, so they learn new vocalizations throughout their life. And they acquire large vocal repertoires that they use, the learned new vocalizations they use in a variety of social contexts, not only for territory defense or mate choice, for example. So yeah, that's what, in songbirds, the function is mostly limited to sexual selection and mate choice and nest defense. And in parrots, the new acquired vocalizations are used for social communication, for example, to coordinate foraging and to recognize different individuals based on their vocalizations. So from the wild, we know that vocal production learning is involved in mediating social relationships, both on group and individual level. For example, the orange-fronted conures and the galahs, the Australian cockatoos, they show rapid vocal convergence or vocal matching when they, so in the fusion societies and within the pair, when they meet each other to facilitate the process, they match the vocal signals, vocalizations of each other. Then in green-rumped parrotlets and in budgerigars, the contact call is very important, and it's transmitted from generation to generation. And of course, the African grey parrots as the most famous example for imitation skills, where he learns even arbitrary object labels and numbers and even concepts using English language. So, but the most apparent and familiar evidence for vocal imitation in parrots comes from birds that are kept as pets, as our companions, and includes imitating human speech and other anthropogenic sounds. The different parrots made headlines in social media, including Einstein. Then there was Budgerigo that had like over 300 or 500 different learned vocalizations, human speech and sound, and a few other famous examples. So yeah, we know that the parrot in general can do it, but we don't really know much about the variation in these skills. So we conducted the first phylogenetic overview of vocal production learning in parrots. And for that, we did a YouTube survey. We made a YouTube search for scientific and common names of each species that exist. So it's over 398 extant parrot species, combined with terms like speaking, imitating, singing into different languages, in English and Spanish. Then we examined the first 50 hits for meeting criteria to include or exclude those videos, and then at least 10 videos were included in the analysis whenever possible. And from the videos that where we found some evidence for vocal imitation, we also scored some additional variables like the number of distinct imitations, the number of words or sounds that you can distinguish in the video that one individual produced. Type of sound, it was word sounds, some babbling that you cannot really distinguish, and the context, if they were doing it alone or in interaction with human or conspecifics. And in addition to that, we also compiled some data from the CITES and on the status in captivity as an indicator for which species are frequently kept as pets. And the chances are high that we can find some evidence for imitation or some videos on YouTube. So we found videos for 163 species, from which most of them were reported in human care, and from which 135 showed evidence for vocal production learning. Then we had another, the species that we didn't find any videos for consisted of 192 species that were reported in captivity. So the chances were high that, given that it's a quite interesting feature to share for people, that it's actually likely that if they did have it, that it would land on YouTube somehow. And then 43 species which are not common in captivity. So those data we just considered as missing data that we cannot conclude much about. So our phylogenetic analysis, we mapped the data on a phylogenetic tree, and it appears the data shows that this ability of vocal production learning is quite, so it was ancestral and present even in the one of the most basal parrot species, the 𝗃𝗃. Then so belonging to genus or to superfamily 𝗔𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗶, including only 3 families. The superfamily 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗃 that have like 20 species, and then the big majority of the species belong to the superfamily 𝗔𝗃𝗀𝗃. And from this family, we found evidence for vocal production learning only in approximately 1/3 of species. And that this variation, this huge variation within this superfamily, suggests 2 possible interesting scenarios of vocal production learning in parrots. First scenario is if vocal production learning was ancestral for all parrots, that would mean that species that here, on the tree in red, the species that do not have that do show vocal production learning, and in blue, that we didn't find any evidences for. So according to the first scenario, if it was ancestral to all parrots, all the species that do not show vocal production learning potentially secondarily lost it in the majority of the 𝗔𝗃𝗀𝗃 before re-evolving it several times again. According to another scenario, to the second scenario, if VPL was vocal production learning was not ancestral, then it would mean that all these species would have evolved vocal production learning independently multiple times. So we have different cases. We have taxa a few taxa that completely lack evidence for vocal production learning. For example, Micropsita, some Loriculus, some species from Lorraini genus. That means all the species in this genus lack the evidence for BPF. And then according to whatever scenario, if it was secondarily lost or never evolved, that would mean that it was, sorry, I went the wrong way. Depending on the scenario, it would mean that they either secondarily lost it or never evolved it. Then we have some taxa which are lacking vocal production learning for whatever reason, whether they secondarily lost it or never evolved, but then with some exceptions. So here, for example, Pirura, Phopus, most of them do not have vocal production learning with some exception. And that would mean that those species either possess a reversed trait, that after the secondary loss, they re-evolved again, or newly evolved independently. Then we have taxa where almost all species do exhibit vocal production learning. Again, for whatever, if they re-evolved it according to the first scenario or newly evolved it according to scenario 2. And that would mean that within this genus, the species who lost it either possess a tertiary loss or a secondary loss according to the second scenario. And this would be a very rare case in animal kingdom. So while secondary losses for some behaviors, social behaviors are known in birds, for example, losing some cooperative breeding or migratory behavior, the tertiary losses are only known from eyeless amphibians, cave-dwelling amphibians. And then finally, we have some taxa, like Amazona and Psittacua, where it's kind of 50-50. There's no clear pattern. So they have a very a high variation if they show it or if they don't show it. That means that suggests that there is, in this taxa, there is a strong selection pressure for and against developing the vocal production learning, depending on socio-ecological conditions and the cost-benefits trade-offs. So it is kind of beneficial, but it's also costly to develop. And going into investigating loose taxa will probably, in more detail, will help to elucidate what kind of ecological pressure actually favor or inhibit this evolution. We also looked into some of the socio-ecological factors that might facilitate the evolution of vocal production learning. So for those species where that were kept in captivity and for which we find or didn't find videos, we analyzed if the longevity, sociality, body size, and brain size correlate with probability of showing vocal production learning. And we found an effect of longevity, sociality, and body size. That means the species with a longer life expectancy are more likely to possess, to show vocal production learning. Also, those species that are more social, with a more dynamic social groups, are also more likely to develop, to evolve the vocal production learning, and the bigger species were more likely to show it. For longevity, we can assume that maybe because they live longer, they also can have more time to acquire new vocalizations and also to benefit from it. The body size, it's a bit tricky. We don't really know, but one potential factor could be that it just because bigger species are more likely to be kept alone with humans. They tend to develop stronger bonds with them, and they are more likely to imitate human speech. And for sociality, yeah, as we know, like if we assume that the main function of vocal production learning in parrots is to mediate social relationships, then in those species with a more complex social structure, it will be more beneficial to have vocal production learning. Then we looked the same for the total repertoire size. That means how many different sounds each species could imitate. And we found a significant effect of sociality and body size, but not of longevity. And that's actually quite interesting because it suggests, like we know it from hummingbirds, that they do not increase the vocal repertoire unlimited, but they replace some of their vocalizations with new one. So to sum up, we found an early presence of vocal production learning in parrots, and it seems to be a very highly dynamic evolutionary process with several secondary losses and gains, and potentially even tertiary losses. Then vocal learning in parrots seems to be adaptive but costly, and there is a substantial interspecific variation in vocal production learning. And we got some potential evolutionary drivers for its evolution, like sociality, longevity, and body size. And as a next step, it would be very important to make some more detailed systematic comparisons within some specific taxa and conduct neuroanatomical, genetic, and developmental studies. Now, less investigated than vocal, or less known than vocal production learning or vocal imitation in parrots is the motor imitation, which is, can be quite important for vocal production learning as well. And our PhD student, 𝗔ህ迄· in her PhD conducted several studies that 3 of them I would like to present here today. And to start with, about automatic imitation. So social learning, it's an important field in animal cognition, and the most complex type of social learning is copying. And this type is splitting in whether only the end of an outcome is emulated, or the actual action, the form of an action, is imitated. And the last one, the imitation, is considered, if it's copying the form of an action, is considered to be the true imitation, which is the key aspect for cultural evolution. So while imitating technical skills, so goal-oriented actions mostly involving some objects, that means some transitive actions that require some simple object manipulation, for example, pushing something, pulling, or even tool use. The cultural practices that are goalless movements without any objects involved, and involve intransitive actions that can, for example, some body movements, some arbitrary movements, gestures, and even dancing. So for humans, we are we tend to imitate intransitive actions involuntarily. So if I wing someone with a hand, it's quite likely that you just answer back without even knowing like what I intend to do with that gestures. And the function of it is increases the affiliation and prosocial tendencies. There are some mirror neurons involved in it. In contrast to monkeys, humans are more likely to copy intransitive actions. And from animals, we only have evidence for imitating transitive actions, so involving some objects or problem-solving tasks. And now we wanted to know, will macaques automatically imitate intransitive actions of conspecifics? So the widely accepted paradigm to do that is a so-called stimulus-response compatibility test. That means there is a demonstration of an action. A participant is supposed to perform an action, and after it sees the demonstration of either the same action, so incompatible condition, for example, opening the hand, the palm, or closing it, or after seeing the demonstrator doing the opposite. So if I'm supposed to open the hand, the demonstrator actually closes. So the compatible part is easy and fast to perform. It does not interfere with what we see. It's just automatically what you see and what you're supposed to do, you're performing it. And if the incompatible part is more difficult to perform and leads to more mistakes. So we trained our birds, the blue-throated macaques, to perform two behaviors: lift leg and opening the wing. And then we divided the animals in two groups, so actually in four. In a compatible one, in incompatible one, and then starting with one behavior or another one. So in the compatible group, the macaque was supposed to lift leg after it was watching the conspecific lifting leg as well. And the incompatible group, he watched as a demonstrator opening the wing, but had to perform the lift leg. Here we have an example of an incompatible group. So here in the back, the demonstrator lifting the leg, and the subject has to open the wing here. Now, the demonstrator was opening the wings, and the subject was almost opening the wings automatically, but then remembered that he had to lift leg instead. And the results showed that in both tests, we also did two different conditions with cued test and non-cued test. That means the subjects were in the cued one, the subjects were asked, were shown the associated command to lift leg, and in non-cued test, there was no command associated with the behavior, but just the command do it. Do it whatever you have seen, or whatever to perform, which is more difficult. And then in both tests, the animals in the incompatible groups struggled much more. So they had more numbers to reach the 80% criteria. It took longer for them to train it. And expectedly, so they were affected by this automatic imitation effect. So to conclude, macaques as the first, it's the first time to be shown in an animal for the intransitive actions. So macaques are also prone, like humans, to automatic imitations of intransitive actions. Then probably also some mirror neurons is involved in, in this process, so it's likely that they convergently evolved in parrots. The subjects could be trained to produce counter-imitative responses, so the system is not innate and based on learning mechanisms. And imitation of intransitive actions may serve as a mechanism to increase affiliation in the social groups. So this was like automatic, unconscious imitation process. Now coming to understanding actually the copy concept. So the majority of studies investigating imitation in animals focused on two action methods. So that means push or pull a lever to the left or to the right with the demonstrator, involving transitive actions, so some objects-related tasks. And far fewer studies looked at imitation of intransitive actions, for example, in some primates, in marine mammals, and in dogs. And all these studies use the copy paradigm. The copy or do as I do paradigm means that the subjects are trained to perform what a human or a conspecific demonstrated with a set of familiar behaviors, and then they get another set of behaviors that were never used in this context, so that they know how to perform, but they haven't learned it with the copy concept. And then even novel behaviors that they haven't seen before. So for that, we trained our birds for 5 different behaviors, including the 2 that I already presented to you. So lift leg, spin, wings, some vocal, and fluff, or shaking. The 3 of them we used to introduce the copy concept. And then the other 2 were used as a transfer tasks before we introduced a completely novel behavior. Here again, a video to show here on the left, the demonstrator, and on the right, the subject. And before we watch the video, I just want to highlight that the copy command consists of two different parts. The look command, so to pay attention to the demonstrator, and the actual copy, do it. So the demonstrator is asked to turn, and the subject lift leg, which was wrong, then they repeat, and the subject turns. Another behavior, open the wing, and it repeats it correctly. So 2 out of 4 subjects successfully copied the 2 untrained actions, the fluff and the vocal, which they had learned to perform, but never did it with the, never practiced it with the copy command. And then one individual, a single individual, spontaneously imitated a novel behavior, the headband, that I will also show. And which is important, that headband is actually a very unnatural behavior for parrots, so it's, it was also very difficult to train for the demonstrator. So he does it spontaneously, then another trial. The demonstrator gets rewarded and will be asked now to do it again. The subject struggles first and then imitated. And only one single individual managed it. So apparently macaws, what we can conclude that macaws are a quite good model system to study the social learning and motor imitation. It works quite well. The ability to imitate the actions of others this probably has some adaptive value and therefore evolved in these macaws. And again, one of the potential socio-ecological explanations for that is that it may serve social bonding and foster group cohesion in parrots. Now coming to the last study, the third part, imitation, which involves learning from observing interaction between other individuals. And it does not involve any training. So for us, for humans, it's quite common. So we do imitate others to seek integration into group, to learn about the social norms and group-specific behavioral norms as first-party imitations. It does not evolve immediately in human children. They first start to imitate directly. So if they observe, they learn from another person in their first year of life, and then the third-party imitation develops at a later stage, towards the end of the second year. And so far, third imitation has been only seen in humans. So we wanted to know, can macaws learn what to do from observing the interaction of others in a third-party constellation? And for this study, we took 11 completely new and naive subjects who had never been trained to perform any of the behaviors that I showed you in the previous study before, and also the associated specific commands for these behaviors. So the experimental setup looked as follows. In the back, we have the demonstrator. The demonstrator was one of the older subjects that were trained to perform those behaviors. So there were like two experimental parrot pairs next to each other. Here in the back, the demonstrator and the experimenter asking for the commands. And then the subject here in the front, who could see both the demonstrator, the conspecific demonstrator, and also the experimenter giving the specific commands. So once more, those were completely naive and untrained subjects. They were habituated to the whole process. They were habituated to be in the testing room and to receive some rewards from an experimenter. But other than that, they didn't have any training. So again, we used the 5 behaviors that I showed you before. And we divided the animals into groups, in the test group and control group. In the test group, the subject could observe the demonstrator interacting with the experimenter, and then were asked to perform the command. And the control group, no interaction was there, so there was no demonstration, and the conspecific didn't receive any commands. Before that, we also conducted a baseline to establish which behavior occurs through observations in the home aviary, to control which behaviors are just more likely to happen spontaneously, just because it's more natural for them. And to make sure that, to observe which were improbable to occur just by chance. So then we scored the number of target actions that each group learned, number of trials they needed to reach the training criteria, the number of correct responses across the trials, and each session consisted of 10 trials, preceded by 3 demonstrations each. So the demonstrator were asked 3 times to perform a behavior. One action was given in each, just one action was given in each session. And the learning criteria was again 80%. So here another videos to visualize. Here in the back, the demonstrator performing the command turn, spin, 3 times in a row. The subject in the front is observing it, how it gets rewarded. And after the third demonstration, the experimenter asks the subject to do it. Here another example of another bird with another behavior, wings. Again, 3 demonstrations, but here you can see that the subject starts performing it automatically without the command. And then another example. For vocals, in the back, the demonstrator vocalizes 3 times. And then the subject struggles at the beginning and then succeeds. So the number of target actions learned by the subjects in two experimental groups differed significantly. The test subjects, here in dark blue, learned significantly more actions, target actions, than the control subjects. The interesting part that they still did learn some, even without the demonstrations. So apparently there are some behaviors that are more likely to happen just by chance. And also the mean correct responses for the the test group performed significantly more accurately compared to the control group. And they required significantly fewer sessions to learn the target group, to target action than the control group. So in conclusion, third-party imitation is not restricted to humans. Blue-throated macaws also show it. Third-party imitation may potentially enhance group synchronization and group cohesion and could be adaptive for this species. Parrots exhibit vocal dialects that we know, but maybe they also they can also socially transmit acquired movements or actions in the wild, for example, in foraging context. Those species are very specialized on one type of fruit, the motaku palm fruit, and it requires some manipulation with the mesocarp. Then, against our predictions, some of those highly improbable actions in response to specific gestures, commands, were acquired also by individuals in the control groups. And for that, we have some explanations. For example, it happened with 2 behaviors that are more natural. For example, lift leg and opening the wings. So, spinning. And for these 2 behaviors, we used gestures that maybe cued the behavior, the correct behavior. Because for lifting leg, we showed finger up, and spontaneous response to that they tried to grab it, and that may elucidate the behavior. And then turning, spinning around, we used with a hand movement above the head, and of course that also can cue them in the right direction. And we have some evidence that that probably is the case, because the one individual that did show in the control group, that did show spinning spontaneous without the demonstration, was moving in the direction that we moved the fingers. And in the test group, the birds were actually mirroring the subjects, because if you imagine the demonstrator is turning around, facing to the window, and then across the X, and then the subject was seeing that the first movement was towards the window, so it had to move in another direction, in the opposite direction, to be first to the window and then turning around. So those are the explanations for the performance acquiring the behaviors in the control group. And yeah, overall, these studies opens up new line of investigations into third-party imitation and imitation of intransitive actions, its evolution and its potential importance for cultural evolution in a non-primate taxon, the parrots. And with that, I would like to thank all the students that over the years conducted all this research, and of course the presidents of the Loroparque and Loroparque Foundation, Wolfgang and Christoph Kiesling, and of course you for your attention.
Thank you, Anastasia. It was really interesting. Are there any questions?
Thank you for your talk. My question is, at first you talk about intelligence is because brain size, but in COVID, because I study on COVID, the COVID intelligence is not only because brain size, it is because density of the neurons. So is it also in the parrot, or it's only because brain size?
Which microphone is referring? Okay, sorry. Can you repeat the last part of the question?
My question is, in parrot, the intelligence is only because brain size, or it also because neural density?
I mean, yeah, they also have a very high neuron density in their brains.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anastasia. I have a question for a clarification, because I think there's something I missed about the last experiment. So, the one where they're looking at they're watching the how did you call it? The demonstrator with the human. Yeah, this one. Mm-hmm. So here, I'm not clear about how you're testing for the specificity of the understanding of the association between the hand movements of the human and the demonstrator. In other words, so imagine that here the parrot that you're testing is merely doing precisely what the other parrot has done just before, and it's not clear that it's actually understanding that what this girl is doing here with her hand, that specific movement is. So in other words, my understanding is that in order to do this, she would have to then say, for example, say the other parrots, the demonstrator does 5 different actions in response to 5 different hand movements, and then you choose one randomly for this one, and this one produces the one that is correctly associated. In that case, then yes, but the way you did it, if I understood it correctly, maybe I misunderstood, it doesn't demonstrate that they could interpret the hand movements of this girl as just do what you just saw, in other words, rather than, you know, this means do that, and I'm not clear that this demonstrates an understanding of the hand movement itself as being, you see what I mean?
So to clarify
Yeah.
it once more, the subject, so the naive bird, didn't know any of the behaviors and didn't know any of the commands. The other subject, the demonstrator, was
Yes.
trained for the. One session consisted just of demonstrations of one action, but there were 5 different conditions, so 5 different behaviors that they had to perform correctly in the end. But within within one session, it was only one action.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that here, what you're measuring is whether this parrot right here is able to reproduce to reproduce a certain action.
The connection between arbitrary hand movement, the command that it has never seen before, and the performed action.
Yes, but you're not testing for that, because here it is possible that this parrot doesn't understand the connection at all. What this parrot is understanding is when the girl in front of me moves and does anything, all I have to do is reproduce what I just saw the parrot next by do. And that would give you the results that you're presenting, but it doesn't mean that the parrot, you see, Orni, you would have to take that parrot out of that context without the other parrot and then start moving your hand, making commands, and then it should reproduce the correct one, but that's not what you're testing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in this case, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I guess a neater design would be at least mix up
Exactly.
the 5 different behaviors in a single session.
Yes,
so
and then randomly present a different one, not necessarily the one that was just presented to the demonstrator, but and then see the association. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so, but you didn't do it, but anyway, that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for this amazing talk. I have also a question on this last experiment, because I was really intrigued by the 2 examples that you showed, in which in the first case, the animal was actually waiting to perform the behavior for the command of its own human experimenter. And in another case, it was reproducing the behavior shown by the conspecific. And I thought, this is absolutely intriguing. And do you have any idea who is doing what? What is going on there? Why do you have some animals that are really waiting to be prompted? As it looks like that they will not bother to copy until they are actually asked by their own experimenter. Is this the case, or do you have any idea what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the order I presented the study were not the actual order they were performed. So actually, that's how we came up with the idea to test for automatic imitation. Because what happened here, actually, it was that they automatically copied the behavior without being asked even. So that's how afterwards, we decided, well, we have to test it if they actually indeed have this effect of automatic imitation.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the talk, very interesting. I have a question to evolutionary tree of the vocal production learning. And you said this appearance, disappearance, appearance again. And you presented like one dimension, just vocal production or not. And if you would decompose it into perception, different components of motoric, and so on, wouldn't your tree become more clearer? That you would, if it appeared multiple times in evolution, then there should be some differences. It cannot appear exactly in all components in an identical way. And if it disappeared, then maybe some components of it would disappear. So.
Yeah, I agree. It's much more complex, and it's just a very first overview of the very one aspect of, at least how big is the variation. But what exactly and how more complex it is, we cannot see from this. Yeah.
Any other question? If not, I have a curiosity. Is there any effect of aging on VPL, so vocal production learning?
As far as I know, it hasn't been shown or investigated. There is another survey from a questionnaire filled in by owners of pet parrots. Also how many different vocalizations they can imitate, phrases, words, and so on. And they did look for, at least for one species, the African grey parrots, where they had a much bigger sample size. They could look into age. They had various age groups. They didn't speak about like aging effect as such, but what they showed and what also our results comply with is that with higher age or with like if an animal is older, it doesn't mean that it has more vocabulary, let's say. But it also doesn't. I mean, we don't know if it kind of declines with some age.
And I have another question, if I can. In your imitation studies, I guess that you were always using familiar individuals as demonstrators. Did you try it also with unfamiliar demonstrators?
For these studies, no.
Okay.
But with some other, like for helping behavior, including token exchange, we did use unfamiliar.
And are they worst, like,
I mean, they showed like what we could show in a previous study that they voluntarily, that the African greys voluntarily helped the affiliative partners, less affiliative, but then with an unknown, completely unknown individuals, they still helped, but to a much less extent.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, I will thank Anastasia again. So now we will have our last poster session. After the poster session, please do not escape, because at 5 we will come back here for the abstract awards and for the closing remarks. So please do not escape.